In the story Star Witness, Christ made it known that the original Ethiopian Bible written in Ge'ez was not in the Old and New Testament format. Then Star found out that it was during the Renaissance period in Europe, with writers such as Martin Luther, William Tyndale, Miles Coverdale, and Thomas Lodge. They were the ones who created the Old and New Testament format and invented terms such as original Greek and original Hebrew. In other words, Martin Luther basically called Yiddish Hebrew, when in fact Yiddish is only 1,000 years old. Let's look it up ourselves after we read this. The earth is the Lord, and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. For he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. Who shall stand in the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He that hath clean hands and a pure heart, who have not lifted up his soul unto vanity, nor sworn deceitfully. He shall receive the blessings from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. This is the generation of them that seek him, that seek thy face, O Jacob, Selah. In other words, the root on to David is Jacob. So who is Jacob? God himself. You are standing in the house of Jehovah in the courtyards of our God. Praise Jah, for Jehovah is good. Make melodies to his name, for Jah has chosen even Jacob for himself. In other words, Jehovah, God, is Jacob, whom is Israel for his special property. So who is Jacob? Jacob is God. So God acknowledged him as the firstborn and gave him his inheritance. And he fixed the boundaries for his tribes, which includes Moses, because Moses is just another name for Joseph. From Jacob sprang the man whom won the favor of all dear to God and men, Moses. So who is Moses? Moses is David, the son of Jesse. In other words, Moses is Solomon. And how do we know Moses is Solomon? In the first book of Esdras. Because in the first book of Esdras, it lets you know that it was Solomon who built the ark. So the holy ark of the Lord in the house that King Solomon, the son of David, had built. In other words, King David named his favorite son Solomon after himself. So Solomon also goes by the name of David. And he is David, the son of Jesse. So where will he be? He will be in the time of Moses, because you remember Moses is Solomon. So Jesus, the son of Nas, successor of Moses, he fought in the sight of the Lord, and he followed the mighty one. In the time of Moses, also he did a work of mercy. In other words, David, the son of Jesse, is together with Jesus and the mighty one in the time of Moses. So let's watch how they try to change time and put the future in the past with the Kevin the Gus, which was written by someone from Great Britain by the name of James Bruce. So he basically put Solomon, who's supposed to be here in the latter days with Sheba, he basically said that they were here thousands of years ago. In other words, they put the future in the past after they created the Old and New Testament format. So let's watch Yiddish. Most authorities believe that Yiddish began in the 10th century in Germany. Don't forget, Martin Luther was from German. So he basically called Yiddish Hebrew. How we know? Because the Yiddish alphabet is literally the Hebrew alphabet, and it started in the 10th century. In other words, approximately 1,000 years ago. So let's watch what Selassie has to say.
Since his restoration in 1941, the Lion of Judah has carried out a program of modernization and of political and social reform, and has begun to westernize the 2,000-year-old Coptic Christian Ethiopia.
You see, he's trying to fix the Coptic Christian Ethiopia. In other words, the Greek kingdom brought Abunas from Egypt, which is part of the Greek kingdom, and created their own churches within his kingdom. So they wanted you to deflect from the God of Israel and pray to whatever they're praying. So look what they did.
He created a strong, centralized monarchy. The country, with its 22 million people, revolves around his personal rule.
You are descended, Your Imperial Majesty, from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba.
That's according to James Bruce. Notice he's speaking English, and instead of him just saying, yes, I am a descendant, he's going to say, this is just our story. In other words, this story was made up in Europe in the 1800s. It's not factual, because there was a king named Menelik 3,000 years ago, but Solomon and Sheba was not there with them. So let's read.
This is just our story, ancient story. The Queen of Sheba, she go to visit Solomon.
In other words, right, it's just our story, an ancient story. Because in reality, the Bible tells us, after many days, you will be given attention in the final part of the years. In other words, during Revelation. And you will come onto the mountains of Israel, which is in Ethiopia, and there you will find Sheba. So that's why he said, this is just our story. In other words, it was made up in Europe by James Bruce, who was following what was already done by Martin Luther, Miles Coverdale, and William Tyndale. He basically doing the same thing they did. As
Personal rule.
You are descended, Your Imperial Majesty, from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba.
This is just our story.
This is just our story, made up in Europe. That's why he said the Bible should not be cut into portions. It should never be in an Old and New Testament format because it placed the future in the past. So let's listen.
I have the highest respect for the Bible as a whole. We also recognize the rightful name the Bible bears. We find that in all the periods of the Old Testament, in the time of patriarchs, kings, and prophets, great miracles were done. On the other hand, the New Testament, in which our Lord himself gave the command to go to all the world and to preach, is also of high value. Then Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four Gospels in which the sayings of our Lord are recorded, are pillars for all men on the earth. Therefore, the Bible should not be cut into portions.
You heard it again. Therefore, the Bible should not be cut into portions. In other words, he's saying the Old and New Testament should be one big book. That's why it was called the Book of the Testament or the Book of the Covenant. But Europe decided to create an Old and New Testament format and place the future heroes in the past. They want you to think that the people that's going to save us from the transatlantic slavery died thousands of years ago. So let's listen again.
Lord are recorded are pillars for all men on the earth. Therefore, the Bible should not be cut into portions.